Lesson 8.5 is on using the distributive property. In this video, you will learn to use the distributive property to factor polynomials and solve quadratic equations of the form ax squared plus bx equals 0. Vocabulary for this section includes factoring, factoring by grouping, and the zero product property. Okay, so the idea behind this is doing the reverse of the distributive property. So instead of taking a factor and distributing it through something like this and saying this is the same thing as 5x plus 15, we're taking something like this and going to that. So in order to do that, I want to look for common terms to both of the, or all of the terms in a polynomial. So looking at the numbers, I want to know the greatest common factor between 15 and 25, and that's going to be 5. So if I pull out a 5, 15 divided by 5, that leaves 3 in the first term, and 25 divided by 5, that leaves 5 in the second term. Then I'm x. Between x and x squared, they both have x to the first in common. I can't take out anything more than that because this one only has up to 1, so I can only take out 1x. If I take out that x is now gone here, but I still have 1x that's left in the other one. So this becomes the factored version of this. So 5x times 3 plus 5x, and that's called factoring, using the reverse of the distributive property. So again, same thing, I want to look for something that's common to all 12, 24, and 30. I want to know the greatest common factor to all of them. So 6 goes evenly into all of them. So I pull out a 6. And then I look at my x. And I have an x here, an x there, and 2x squared there. So the biggest x I can pull out is x. And then I look at my y squared, and y to the 4th. The biggest y I can pull out is just 1y. So then I'm going to look to see what's left. So I'm going to do 12xy divided by 6xy, and I get 2. 2 is left. Or I can think of it as 6xy times what gives me 12xy, and times 2. Okay, and then I'm going to say, okay, 6xy times what gives me 24xy squared. So 6 times 4 gives me the 24. X times 1 is just x, that's okay. And y times what gives me y squared? I need a y there. Okay, and then 6 times what gives me negative 30, and that's negative 5. X times what gives me x squared? X. Y times what gives me y to the 4th, and that's y to the 3rd. And then that would be my answer. So I would just probably write it, instead of plus a negative 5x, I would write it as minus 5xy. Okay? There's another thing that we can do, which is called factoring by grouping. So generally, if we're looking at something that has 4 terms, we're going to be looking at factoring by grouping. So the idea behind it is you look at the first 2 terms and see what you can pull out. So in this case, you can pull out an x from the first 2 terms. They both have x. And then you look at the last 2 terms, and they both have a y. So you can pull out a y. Once you do that, it could have the same thing that's left after you pulled out from them, and that's a plus b. So then you pull out a plus b, and you're left with x and y. We'll do an example. So looking at this, there's nothing that's common to all 4 terms. So when there's nothing common to all 4, factoring by grouping. So we're going to group it, the first 2 terms and then the last 2 terms. So looking at just the first 2 terms, what do they have in common? They both have x. So I'm going to pull out x, and I have left 2y plus 7 after I pull out an x from each of those terms. And then I look at the next thing, and they both have a, right? So if I pull out negative 1, what I'm left with is 2y plus 7. So now looking at this, I have 2y plus 7. I have 2 terms now, and both of them have 2y plus 7. And that's what I want to pull out. So 2y plus 7 is what I factor out first. And then what I have left here and here is x minus 1. And then now it's factored, and that's factoring by grouping. Okay, so again, I look at this, and there's nothing that's common to all four terms. So I'm thinking factoring by grouping. So I group them together like that. So the first two terms, I have 3 and a that go evenly into both of those terms. So if I pull out 3a, 15a divided by 3a is 5, and negative 3ab divided by 3a is just negative b. So I get 5 minus b. Looking at the next part, they both have 4. So if I pull out 4, I'm left with b minus 5. Now, if you remember before, from the last section, we saw that if you have a minus b, it's the same thing as negative b minus a. So these are almost the same thing here, except one of them is 5 minus b and the other one's b minus 5. So I want to get them so they're going to be the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write this as 3a times 5 minus b, and I'm going to pull out a negative and switch those. So instead of positive 4, I'm going to make it negative 4 and make it 5 minus b. So now looking at this, our terms have 5 minus b. So I'm going to pull out 5 minus b, and then what I have is 3a and minus 4. So it's going to be 3a minus 4. And then now it's factored. Okay, the next thing is zero product property. So if the factors, two factors is 0, at least one of the factors must be 0. So you can't multiply two things together and get 0 unless one or both of them are 0. So if you have two things multiplied together equal to 0, set them both equal to 0 and solve. So in our case here, we have this thing times this thing multiplied together and it gives you 0, which means the only way you can get to 0 is if one factor is 0. So that means either x minus 2 is going to be 0 or 4x minus 1 has to be 0. The only way you can multiply two things together and get 0 is if one of them or both of them is 0. So we want to solve both of these things as if they were 0. So solving this one to find x, I'm going to say x is going to be 2. And if I solve this one, I'm going to get 4x equals 1 or x equals 1/4. Okay, so if I were to go back and x is 1/4 or x equals 2 for x, I would get a true statement and I would get 0. So my solutions are x equals 2 and x equals 1/4. Okay, so there's two possible answers that make that statement true. So there's two solutions. All right, if I have something like this where it's not set up currently as equal to 0, I want to set it equal to 0. So to do that, I'm going to subtract 4y from both sides so that I can get 0. So here they cancel, and I get 0 equals 12y squared minus 4y. Now I want to factor this. Anytime I have this like squared thing, you want to be thinking factoring because you don't want, it's hard to solve when you have a square. So you want to get it to a single power, to the power of 1. So if I look at this, what's common to both of them? Both of them have 4y. So if I pull out 4y, I'm left with 3y and then minus 1. And if this is equal to 0, now I have two things multiplied together. So either this is going to be equal to 0 or this is going to be equal to 0. So let's assume, let's say 4y is 0. Then we solve that for y and we get y is 0 dividing by 4. 0 divided by 4 is 0. Or I can say 3y minus 1 is 0. Solving this, I'm going to get 3y equals 1 and y equals 1/3. So my two solutions are y equals 0 or y equals 1/3. Either one of those two things, if I plug them into my original equation, will give me a true statement, which means that they are solutions. Okay, the last part, last problem. A football is kicked into the air. The height of the football can be modeled by the equation h equals negative 16x squared plus 48x, where h is the height reached by the ball after x seconds. Find the values of x when h equals 0. So basically, we're just going to take our h equals 0 and plug it in for h and solve using the same method that we just used. So we're going to say 0 equals negative 16x squared plus 48x. So what we want to do is we want to get rid of this power of 2. And we do that by factoring out a common term to both of these. So, negative 16x. Both of them have x, and both of them have 16 that goes evenly. So if I pull out negative 16x, I'm left with x, and then here I'm left with negative 3. And this is equal to 0. So solving this, either this part here has to be 0, or multiplying two things together and we get 0. So one or both of those parts have to be equal to 0. So let's x equals 0. Solving that for x, we're going to get x equals 0. And then if we x minus 3 equals 0, solving that one, x is going to be 3. So either x is 0 or x is 3. So if we're talking about the height of a ball, it kind of makes sense. So it gets shot up and it hits the ground again after 3 seconds, and it started at the ground at 0 seconds. So the ball is in the air for a total of 3 seconds. Okay, and that is the end of this section. If you want to try some practice problems, here they are.